Welcome to the show that focuses on Mother Africa. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. This week on the show, we host Ambassador Macharia based at the United Nations in New York. Ambassador, it's such a pleasure to host you on the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Now, you've been in the development space, in the diplomatic space for many years. Just looking at Africa today, I want to get a sense of where you think the continent is in terms of development. What are our greatest challenges? What are our greatest opportunities?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your program. And just to get straight to the point, I'm one of those people who believes that Africa is at a very important point in its development progression. And Africa is really no different than many other continents in the world, in spite of what people might want to say.
Right.
And there's always a time of transition. There are times of inflection when political processes, economic processes, social processes come together and things begin to happen. There are times when things go forward, and then sometimes there are times when things unfortunately pull back.
Right.
The key to all of this is usually the kind of leadership that you have in a country, the kind of friends and relationships that your country has with other countries, friendships, if you will, that your country has with other countries, particularly its neighbors.
I want to focus for a moment on looking at the transition between that push for independence, self-determination, the vision for Africa, and somehow there seemed to be a disconnect somewhere in the middle. And now we're at a place where you're saying we're getting it together again in terms of leadership. What did we get wrong, do you think, in between? And what mistakes do we need to avoid moving forward?
I don't know that we got things wrong per se, although of course there were terrible leadership issues.
Okay.
It was that we didn't have the institutions to allow us to organize ourselves in ways in which we could become powerful and meaningful in the world. Right now, we saw the transition from the OAU to the AU. A lot of people are very cynical and dismissive of the AU. I am a great admirer of that institution because of what it's trying to do under very difficult circumstances, using and working with countries that are themselves challenged. It's like having a membership that is made up of poor people. It's not going to do exceptional things, and it might aspire to, but it might be limited by its resources. But despite all of that, we now have Vision 2063, which is an amazing vision that is looking to help African countries come together, organize together to transform their continent.
With a common agenda.
With a common agenda, because it's only a common agenda. It's only working together, as I said a little earlier, with your neighbors that's going to allow us to get where we want to get to faster and fastest.
Right.
And in my opinion, we have to appreciate that it needed to take time. We needed to go through the transition of building our human capital, of putting together our private sector, of putting together our institutions, of putting together credible constitutions that allowed ownership, okay, and allowed the passion of the people to manifest itself in society. We had to get there.
I want to come to the development agenda now. And, as I mentioned earlier, before I ever met you, I heard of you, and I heard of you internationally. People said there is this Kenyan who has been at the forefront of creating the SDGs. Now, I want you to speak to those who are not very familiar with what these SDGs are. What impact could they have on our lives? Why were these development goals set up? And what could they mean for Africa, for Kenya, for Rwanda, for Nigeria, for South Africa? What could they mean?
The SDGs are nothing but everybody's aspiration for a better world, a sustainable world. We're going to develop. Every country is going to develop. The question is, are you going to develop well, or are you going to develop badly? If you develop badly, you end up in a dirty city with bad infrastructure, with chaotic traffic, with criminality, with terrorism. There are many ways to develop. It's still a development. After all, even our country has developed over the last 50 years. Could it have done better? For sure. So the question is, what kind of development do we want? We want sustainable development, one in which we're able to protect our environment, one in which we're able to protect our rivers, one in which we're able to protect our seas and oceans, one in which we're able to protect our food sources. Why? Because if we don't, we won't make it. And I'm not saying that in a light sense. I'm saying there's a gentleman called Professor Hawkins, who people may have heard of.
Yes, Stephen Hawkins.
Stephen Hawkins. He said about a couple of weeks ago that if humanity continues on the same trajectory, ignoring the imperative of creating a sustainable planet, okay, dealing with issues of climate change, issues of managing our oceans, which we are killing, issues of managing our forests, which we are destroying, issues of managing our fisheries in our rivers and our lakes, which we are busy over-consuming. We will not be able to live on this planet 100 years from now. Does that sound like a long time? 100 years? It's a very short time, if you ask me. Because that would have meant that if this was happening during my grandparents' time, I would not be alive today because I would not have a planet in which to live.
This is a threat to our grandchildren.
So your grandchildren are basically being tracked for unsustainability. So the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is why they've caught on in the world. This is why America, China, the Scandinavian countries, Germany, it doesn't matter, Latin America, it doesn't matter where you go, they are talking about them now because they've recognized that what we have been trying to get across is actually true.
I would ask you to please look into the camera and just deliver a message to Africa. You know, in many ways we've spoken about the work that you do, and you say, you know, I do not do it for me. In many ways I do it for the legacy it gives to Kenya, the legacy for Africa, and the responsibility that I have is important for that legacy. What would you teach, or what would you share with the Africans watching this show?
Well, what I would say is that the future of the continent is amazingly bright, and it attracts us. It only seeks for us to believe in ourselves as Africans and to believe in the potential of our continent. That's all. And if we do that, we will amaze ourselves and amaze everyone else in the incredible future that awaits us.
Do you believe? All you need to do is just sit down for a moment, think about Africa, and believe in the potential. And then you'll find your position in actualizing that. Thank you so much. What a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
You're welcome, and very welcome.